They slid a stack of pension papers across the boardroom table on the morning I turned 52, under buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of burnt coffee. I'm Dorian Hale, internal controller, clutching a stitched pink ribbon around my stock contract as their smiles tightened. Ever had a birthday surprise that felt more like a challenge? The first thing I noticed when I stepped into Celeste's foyer was the smell of citrus polish and something faintly artificial, like the air had been scrubbed too hard to smell like a home. Spring in Raleigh had a way of making every manicured yard look like a catalog cover, HOA-approved flower beds, the exact right length of emerald grass, and her place was no exception. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor's grill was sending up the rich scent of barbecue, but inside the Blake mansion it was all candles and soft piano music piped through invisible speakers, the kind that sounded expensive but hollow. Marla was in the center of it all, lit by the chandelier like it was her own private stage. A diamond ring caught every angle of light as she raised her hand to wave at a cousin, basking in the polite laughter that circled the room. Celeste, poised as ever in her pearl necklace and slate-gray dress, stood by the gift table, her hand resting protectively on Marla's shoulder like she was presenting a prize-winning heirloom. I stood a few steps back, smiling just enough to pass for pleasant, my hands buried deep in my pockets. "Let's toast my favorite daughter Celeste," announced her voice carrying like a practiced speech. Glasses clinked, the chatter stilled, and she lifted a crystal flute of champagne. Her other hand held a small wrapped package, which she passed to me with a polished smile. "And for you, Dorian," she added something to keep all our figures straight. Inside the paper was a flimsy discount store notebook, the kind with thin blue lines and a flimsy plastic cover. Marla, meanwhile, had just opened a velvet box to reveal a necklace studded with emeralds, and the crowd erupted in admiration. I felt my lips twitch into something like a smile, but my jaw tightened behind it. "Don't look so serious," Celeste said lightly, tapping my elbow. "At least you'll be remembered when it's time to sign the inheritance papers." Her tone was syrupy sweet, meant to sound like a joke, but the glance she shared with Marla said otherwise. A few relatives chuckled, the kind of awkward laughter people give when they don't know which side to pick. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I glanced down, an automated email glowed on the screen. "Happy birthday, Dorian. Wishing you a productive year ahead. HR team." I stared at it longer than I should have, letting the dull humor of the timing wash over me. Above me, Marla laughed as someone mentioned her last trip to the Caribbean, her emerald necklace catching the light again, like a signal flare. I wandered toward the punch bowl, poured myself a cup of something red and watered down, and leaned against the edge of the buffet. My eyes drifted across the room, noting the averted gazes, the stiff postures. It was a reflex by now, scanning cataloging like I did with balance sheets at work. There were always patterns who wanted to be seen laughing with the Blakes who avoided my side of the room, as if humility were contagious. The soft hum of the piano track skipped for a second, and the silence that followed was heavier than it should have been. Then Marla raised her glass. "Mom says I'll inherit Dad's shares since Dorian's got his own thing." Her tone was bright, oblivious, but the words struck like a ledger line drawn in permanent ink. A ripple of amusement passed through the room. Celeste nodded her smile taut, as if this announcement had been rehearsed. My grip on the flimsy notebook tightened until the cover bent, but I said nothing. The laughter resumed. Someone started a new toast, and I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket. My fingers found the soft, worn texture of the pink ribbon tucked there, coiled like a lifeline. I wound it around my index finger, slowly grounding myself as the voices blurred into a distant hum. "They have no idea what I've prepared," I whispered too softly for anyone to hear. The words were for me alone, carried away by the faint whiff of smoke from a grill outside and the muted clink of glasses around Marla's emerald glow. The office felt heavier after hours, as if the air itself thickened once everyone left. The hum of the HVAC was constant low and steady, a mechanical heartbeat in a building that was otherwise dead quiet. I sat at my desk with only the desk lamp on its circle of yellow light, pooling over stacks of paper like a stage light. Beyond the wide windows downtown, Raleigh's skyline blinked against the dark street lamps' taillights, a few late-night diners still open on the corner. I should have gone home, but I couldn't shake the aftertaste of Marla's laughter from earlier that night. The retirement fund ledger glowed on my monitor numbers, marching across rows and columns with a precision that would look convincing to anyone not trained to read between the lines. But I'd seen it before. These numbers didn't add up again. A shift here, a sudden withdrawal there, all smoothed over by entries labeled with harmless names like administrative adjustment and deferred maintenance. Every adjustment tied back in some way to the Blakes. I reached for the mouse and began exporting the documents one by one, saving each as a locked PDF with timestamps. The printer in the corner coughed to life, slowly spitting out hard copies that I would stash in a safe place later. The faint smell of toner mixed with the subtle metallic scent of the HVAC system, making the air taste sterile. The phone on my desk buzzed. My attorney's voice came through the speaker, calm and deliberate. "If they're moving pension funds, Dorian, you need to protect yourself first. Time-stamped copies, off-site backups, and no signatures on anything until I tell you." I know I said, my voice low, already saving them. I dragged another folder into the encrypted drive. This isn't just about the fund. Celeste's pulling from everywhere. HOA fees, medical bills. I sifted through a pile of invoices, my fingers brushing over the faded ink of an overdue HOA notice addressed to Celeste. Behind it, a hospital bill, the total circled in red pen. No memo, no note, just evidence of the kind of pressure that made her dig claws into any source of cash she could reach. It didn't excuse her, but it told me why she was tightening the screws on me. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Nestled inside was the purchase agreement I'd signed months ago, quietly securing 10% of the company's stock. The pink ribbon, still intact, bound the folder neatly. The texture of it under my fingers felt steady, unlike the chaos in the numbers glowing on my screen. I ran my thumb along its stitched edge, a reminder of how long I'd been playing the quiet game, how careful I'd had to be. I slid the folder back, closed the drawer, and locked it. Then I checked the lock twice. On my screen, a progress bar crept forward as the final batch of spreadsheets uploaded to the secure server. I queued a timed email to my attorney set to send at 8 a.m. the next morning, with every file attached, just in case something happened between now and then. The blue light of the monitor reflected faintly off the window, superimposing my face over the cityscape, like a ghost watching its own life unravel. The printer coughed again, ejecting the last page. I gathered the stack, straightened it, and slid it into a manila envelope. The edges were still warm, the ink not quite dry, smudging faintly against my thumb. The sound of the HVAC filled the silence until a new tone cut through a sharp ping from my inbox. It was from Celeste. The subject line read, "Pension accounts." The message was one line, no greeting, no signature. Sign off on the pension accounts by Friday. No delays. I stared at the words, the cursor blinking like a metronome at the end of her command. My thumb tapped the edge of the envelope, leaving a faint smudge where the ink still hadn't set. Slowly, I closed the laptop, the screen going black, and throwing the office into shadow, except for the desk lamp's glow. Outside, the city lights blurred as a drizzle began to bead on the window. I leaned back in my chair, hands resting on the armrests, and whispered to the empty room. Not this time. My reflection in the glass didn't look angry. It looked patient, the way an auditor looks at a ledger that's about to tell the truth, whether anyone likes it or not. The porch creaked beneath my shoes as I stepped onto it, the boards worn smooth by years of rocking chairs and quiet conversations. Agnes's house sat at the end of a narrow street lined with oaks that had already begun shedding their leaves, copper and gold, spiraling down in the cool autumn air. A faint breeze carried the scent of chamomile and cedar, the former wafting from the steaming mug on the small table, the latter from the box she slid toward me. "Sit," she said, softly, her voice like the calm hum of a nurse who's seen every kind of storm. Agnes Whitmore was wrapped in a thick navy cardigan, her silver hair tied back loosely. She didn't look at me right away. Her eyes were fixed on the sparrows pecking at a feeder a few feet away. When she finally met my gaze, there was something steady there, a kind of patience that didn't need words. I eased into the chair opposite her, the wicker creaking as I shifted. The box sat between us, a cedar rectangle no larger than a loaf of bread, its surface polished but unadorned. The smell of wood and the faint sweet scent of the tea filled the cool air, a mix that made me exhale a little slower than I had all day. "These," she murmured, tapping the lid lightly, "might save more than your case, they might save you." I opened the box carefully. Inside were 14 envelopes, each yellowed slightly with age, but kept meticulously clean. A single pink ribbon bound them together smooth and unfrayed, a delicate contrast to the rough cedar. My fingers brushed the ribbon first, and the texture sent a small current up my arm, soft, warm, and heavier with meaning than any ledger or contract I'd held in my career. Agnes folded her hands in her lap. "She told me to burn them once. Celeste." Her lips tightened, just slightly. "Came by here years ago, said these letters were nothing but trouble. I told her I'd do it. And then I couldn't." She looked out at the trees, her jaw tightening. "I knew someday you'd need to read what they tried to erase." I untied the ribbon gently, as if pulling too hard might make the whole stack vanish. The first letter was dated on my 7th birthday. The handwriting was elegant, slightly slanted, every loop and line deliberate. "Dear Dorian," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever see this, but I write anyway every year. I hope you like books the way I do. I hope you found someone who notices when you smile." The words blurred for a moment. I blinked, focusing on the ink, tracing the shapes with my finger. Each sentence landed heavier than the last, not because they were sad, but because they felt like something I'd been waiting to hear without knowing it. More real than any party toast or token gift I'd been handed in my life. Agnes's chair creaked as she leaned forward. "Evelyn Rowe, that's her name, lives in Brooklyn if she's still there. I can vouch for these letters in court too, and for Celeste's history." Her voice didn't carry anger, only fact. "If they want to play hard, you'll need more than contracts." I nodded slowly, my thumb still running along the ribbon's edge. "I don't know what I'd even say to her." Agnes tilted her head. "Maybe just thank you for not forgetting you existed." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed violently on the table. Marla's name lit the screen. I didn't want to answer, but Agnes gave a slight nod, so I did, putting it on speaker. "Sign." Marla's voice snapped no greeting, no pleasantries. "Mom says sign the pension papers or she'll make sure you lose everything you think you've got." There was a laugh, cold and shallow, before the line went dead. The sparrows scattered from the feeder, startled by the abrupt tone. Agnes exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "Some people don't understand that silence isn't weakness," she said. I gathered the letters, smoothing the ribbon over them once more, and slipped them back into the cedar box. My hand lingered on the lid before I looked at the folded map of Brooklyn Agnes had slid across the table. The paper smelled faintly of the cedar it had been stored beside. "Time to finish this," I whispered, not to Agnes, not to anyone in particular, but to the stack of letters to Evelyn, to myself. The Blake house felt different in winter, like the walls themselves had grown colder despite the constant hum of the heating system. Outside, rain pelted the windows in sharp, steady rhythms, and every gust of wind sent a faint whistle through the chimney. The air inside smelled of fireplace smoke and lemon polish, the kind of scent that masked more than it revealed. The chandelier overhead threw a pale, muted glow across the living room, catching on polished frames of family portraits, each one featuring Marla or Celeste, never me. Celeste sat in the high-backed chair by the hearth, her posture perfectly straight, despite the tension visible in her jaw. Two lawyers flanked her like sentinels, their expressions flat, their leather briefcases propped neatly against their legs. Marla lounged on the sofa legs crossed, her smirk faint but deliberate. She was dressed as though this were a social call, not a meeting that could decide the future of everything I'd built. Celeste didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dorian," she began, her voice measured but quivering, ever so slightly, "for the sake of this family, you'll sign the pension reports and renounce any claims to the estate. We need unity, not lawsuits." Her fingers tapped the armrest in a precise rhythm, betraying her agitation. I stood near the window hands, in my coat pockets, the glass cold against my back. My eyes traced the raindrops streaming down the pane, tiny rivers twisting over each other. "Unity," I asked quietly. "Or control?" Her gaze hardened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've done well for yourself. Marla needs this more. She's carrying the family's public image, something you've never cared for." I didn't move, just watched the fire crackle and spit as a log shifted. The smell of smoke was stronger here, mingling with the faint sweet scent of burning oak. "This isn't about image," I said. "This is about covering holes you've dug." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe? Or just fear? She gestured sharply toward the small stack of envelopes on the coffee table. "The letters from Evelyn. My letters." "These are nothing but distractions," she snapped, grabbing them before I could react. With a practiced motion, she tore the pink ribbon clean in half, the sound sharp and final in the still room. The envelopes fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. "Sentimental trash," she said, each syllable clipped. Before I could take a step forward, she tossed the bundle into the fireplace. The flames leapt greedily, devouring paper and ribbon alike, the embers hissing as the moisture in the aged envelopes met the heat. The smell of singed paper filled the room, acrid and heavy. I watched in silence, jaw tight, as the pink ribbon blackened and curled into nothing but ash. Marla's smirk deepened as she crossed her legs the other way. One of the lawyers finally spoke, his tone neutral, but edged. "Shall we proceed with the signatures?" "Mr. Hale?" I didn't answer. Instead, I reached down to my briefcase, unlatched it, and pulled out a slim folder. Inside, the original purchase agreement for my 10% stake, untouched, secured long before this meeting was ever called. I slid it back in, latched the case, and met Celeste's stare. A buzz in my pocket broke the tension for just a moment. I glanced at my phone, a message from a junior employee at the company.
"We're ready to back you when this blows up."
The glow from the screen lit my hand faintly, a cool counterpoint to the orange of the fire. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof like a warning. I stepped toward the door, pausing only once to look back at Celeste. "You'll see me again?" I said, evenly the words steady but edged on my terms. The door closed behind me with a muted thud, the cold air hitting like a wave. Within seconds, the rain soaked through my coat, the chill settling deep into my bones. I pulled out my phone, its screen casting a pale light against the storm-dark street, and tapped my attorney's number. As the call began to ring, I walked into the downpour without looking back, the sound of the fire and the laughter inside replaced by the hiss of rain on asphalt. The boardroom was quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The rain from last night had given way to a gray morning, and through the glass walls of the 32nd floor, Raleigh looked washed-out buildings dulled by cloud-cover streets, slick and empty of any real life. The smell of overbrewed coffee lingered near the credenza in the corner, sharp and slightly bitter, like the tension settling over the table. Celeste sat across from me, her posture immaculate as always, but I caught the way her eyes kept darting to the stack of papers at her elbow. Her nails tapped softly against the pension files she slid toward me, each click a perfectly measured beat, like a metronome in a room that had lost its rhythm. Marla sat beside her shoulders, relaxed but lips pressed into a line, as if she could sense the storm beneath the polished surface, but didn't know where it would break. Dorian Celeste began her tone smooth, but lacking its usual weight for the good of the family. "We need to put this behind us. Sign the documents. Help us protect what our name still stands for." She tapped the top page with a manicured finger. No more delays, no more games. I didn't touch the papers. My right hand rested on my thigh, feeling the cold edge of the USB drive in my pocket, the one my attorney had made sure was loaded with every file, every timestamp, every discrepancy we'd found. Across the table, he leaned in slightly and murmured, "It's time." The chairperson of the board cleared his throat, glancing between us.
"Mr.?"
"Hale, do you intend to cooperate with the Blake's proposal, or do you have a statement to make?" His voice was neutral, but the faint arch of his brow told me he'd seen enough power plays in this room to recognize another one. I pulled the folder from my briefcase. The stitched pink ribbon wrapped around it stood out starkly against the stark corporate decor, soft against the steel-gray table. I placed it gently in front of me, untied it with steady fingers, and spread out the documents my original purchase agreement for 10% of the company's stock, along with certified copies of the pension fund irregularities. "This," I said quietly, sliding the first set of papers toward the chairperson, "is why I won't be signing anything. These transfers labeled administrative adjustments are illegal. And as of this morning, every one of them is secured in the hands of our auditors and, if necessary, the state." Celeste's hand froze mid-tap. Marla shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward her mother. One of the board members leaned forward, scanning the documents with a furrowed brow. The room filled with the soft rustle of paper, punctuated by the faint click of the USB, as I set it down beside the stack, its tiny green light blinking like a heartbeat. My attorney slid a thin folder across the table toward the board. Hospital invoices, delinquent HOA fees, and personal withdrawals all tied back to Celeste Blake. "There's your good of the family." His tone was even, but the words landed heavy. Celeste's eyes flashed, and for the first time I saw the veneer crack. Those debts have nothing to do with this company, she said, her voice tight, her nails now motionless on the polished table. The chairperson looked up, his gaze settling on me.
Mr. Hale, with your verified stake, the board recognizes your authority in this matter. The Blakes' claims are void unless they can reconcile these findings.
Celeste opened her mouth, but no words came. Her lips parted, then pressed together again, her eyes darting toward Marla, who stared down at her lap as if willing the meeting to end. I gathered the ribbon, tying it loosely around my folder once more. The sound of the ribbon sliding against the paper was soft but final, like the closing of a ledger. I stood my chair, scraping softly against the carpet, and slid the USB back into my pocket. The board members watched as I adjusted my coat, my movements slow and deliberate. As I reached the door, I glanced back once. Celeste sat perfectly still, her face pale against the gray morning light filtering through the windows. Marla stared blankly at the pension files as though they'd turned to dust in her hands. In the quiet hallway beyond the boardroom, I exhaled my breath, fogging faintly in the chilled air. Under my breath, I muttered, "One more chapter left before this ledger balances." The words tasted less like a threat and more like a promise to myself. The elevator dinged softly, its doors opening to another stretch of muted gray. I stepped inside, the pink ribbon coiled neatly in my pocket, and pressed the button for the ground floor without a glance back. The cold hit harder on Carlton Street than anywhere else I'd walked that day. The kind of winter air that cuts through your coat and lingers in your lungs, making each breath feel like a small challenge. The sidewalks were narrow, rimmed with crusted snow, and the chipped iron railing leading up to the brownstone was slick beneath my gloved hand. I stood still for a long moment, my boots planted on the bottom step, staring at the faded wreath still hanging on the front door, months past the season it had been meant for. The first letter Evelyn had ever written me trembled in my other hand, the envelope soft from the years Agnes had kept it safe. Behind the lace curtains, a faint light flickered, casting a moving shadow against the fabric. Somewhere down the block, a deli vent released a curl of nutmeg and cinnamon into the frozen air, the kind of warmth that only reminded you how cold you really were. A subway rumbled faintly below the street, a deep vibration in my feet, like the city's own pulse, reminding me the world kept moving no matter who was ready to face it. I pulled in a breath that stung and climbed the remaining steps, each one making my chest feel heavier, not lighter. My knuckles tapped the door once, twice. For a few seconds only, the echo of the subway and the muffled chatter of a passing pedestrian reached me. Then, the door latch clicked. She appeared slowly, her hand gripping the frame like she needed to hold on to something steady. Hazel eyes, just like mine, caught the dim glow of the hallway light behind her. Her hair was swept back into a loose twist, strands of silver falling around her face, but there was a certain grace in the way she stood there, quiet and poised, despite the years that had weighed on her. "Yes," she asked, voice cautious, soft. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The letter in my glove crinkled as I held it out. Instead, my fingers stiff from the cold. She looked down at it, then back at me. For a long second, the air between us felt suspended, like even the wind had stopped to listen. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope, recognizing her own handwriting. "Dorian," she whispered, as though the name were a memory she hadn't dared speak aloud in years. I nodded. Yes. I found the letters," Something broke open in her face. Not a smile, not quite tears, but a release. She stepped back, pushing the door wider, the faint warmth of her home spilling out to meet me. "Come in, please. It's freezing." Inside, the air was scented with tea and something faintly sweet, like bread just out of the oven. The floors creaked beneath our steps as she led me through a narrow hallway into a modest kitchen. A kettle hissed softly on the stove, steam curling upward in the muted light. We sat at a scarred wooden table, its surface worn smooth by time, a few faint knife marks catching the glow of the overhead lamp. She held the pink ribbon in her lap, stroking it absently, as if afraid it might disappear. "They told me back then that it was for the best, that a good family God-fearing would raise you right. I begged to keep you, Dorian." Her voice cracked on my name, the sound raw. "My aunt, she threatened to throw me out. The church made arrangements. They promised updates. Pictures, maybe. I never got one, so I wrote every year." Her thumb ran along the stitched edge of the ribbon, eyes glistening. "They told me to stop. I couldn't." I stared at the ribbon, at her hands, at the faint tremor in her voice, and felt something I hadn't expected, not just sadness, but recognition. "Every birthday I waited for something that never came," I said quietly. "One year I baked my own cake, lit a match, sang to myself. I thought it was just the way life was." Her eyes closed briefly, and a single tear slid down her cheek, landing on the ribbon. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing the back of my hand, hesitant, as if testing if I was real. "They couldn't erase you from me, even when they tried," she whispered, voice breaking but sure. The subway rumbled again beneath us, a low vibration that made the cups on the shelf rattle softly. Outside, the wind picked up, tapping a bare branch against the kitchen window in a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. I turned my hand over, letting her fingers settle into my palm, warm, despite the chill still clinging to my skin. I looked into those hazel eyes, reflections of my own, and felt something shift like a lock, finally turning after decades. "Then we'll write the next chapter together," I said, my voice low but firm. She nodded, no words, only the faintest smile tugging at the corners of her mouth as the kettle whistled softly behind us, the only sound in a kitchen that for the first time in my life felt like it belonged to me. The late afternoon sun spilled through the tall windows of the law office, cutting warm golden stripes across the polished conference table. Outside, oak leaves skittered across the plaza in erratic spirals, their brittle edges whispering against the brick. The faint hum of a cafe's espresso machine across the street filtered through the glass when the door opened and closed, adding a soft backdrop to the stillness inside. It felt like the world was moving on quietly, and for the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to catch up or hold my ground. I sat with my pen poised, my fingers resting lightly on the final line of the document before me. The folder beneath it was bound by the stitched pink ribbon, no longer frayed, its edges smooth, where someone Evelyn with careful hands had mended it weeks earlier. It didn't feel like a trophy or a relic anymore. It felt like a promise. Across the table, Agnes sat with her hands folded, her weathered fingers laced together. Her navy cardigan, the same one she always wore on cool days, looked almost ceremonial in this space of polished wood and legal jargon. Her eyes were glistening, though she tried to blink it away with the practiced composure of someone who had been everyone's rock for decades. Evelyn, on her other side, rested a hand gently on Agnes's forearm, her own soft smile steadying the older woman more than words could. The attorney, a middle-aged man in a charcoal suit, cleared his throat politely.
Mr. Hale, when you're ready.
This will finalize the establishment of the Agnes Whitmore Foundation. The charter specifies the mission support for abandoned children and women rebuilding their lives. Your initial endowment and share allocation are already on record. His voice was even rehearsed, but not unkind. I lowered the pen, the faint scratch of ink on parchment loud in the quiet room. Each signature felt like a release, not a weight. For years, everything I signed seemed to bind me tighter to obligations I hadn't chosen. This time, it felt like the opposite. The documents were more than paper. They were a bridge one that carried my life from survival into something resembling purpose. When the last page was signed, Agnes stood slowly leaning slightly on the edge of the table as she steadied herself. She didn't look at the attorney or even at me. Her gaze lingered on the folder with the ribbon still draped over it, its color soft and warm under the afternoon light. "Healing isn't loud," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough to fill the room. "But it lasts." Her words didn't need a reply. Evelyn reached for the ribbon, lifting it gently, and walking to a small glass frame resting on a shelf near the window. She opened it with care, laying the ribbon across a black velvet backing, smoothing it flat, as though it were the most fragile thing in the room. The frame clicked shut, the glass catching the sunlight and reflecting it across the far wall, a thin band of rose-pink glow that lingered even after Evelyn stepped back. Agnes's eyes welled again, though she quickly dabbed at the corner of her lashes with a tissue. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now others will bloom in the dark too." For a moment, none of us moved. The only sounds were the faint buzz of the cafe outside and the rustle of leaves scraping against the plaza stones. I looked down at my hands, fingers still resting on the pen, and then up at the framed ribbon casting its faint light across the room. It struck me how different this felt from every victory I'd ever had. No gloating, no ledger to balance, no audience to impress. Just stillness and something that almost felt like peace. I rose, walking slowly to the window. The plaza below was dotted with people wrapped in scarves, some hurrying, some lingering, as the day shifted toward evening. I watched an older couple share a paper cup of coffee on a bench, their shoulders brushing as they talked. Beyond them, a child kicked a stray leaf into the air, laughing as it spun away on the breeze. With my palm against the cool glass, I murmured to myself, "Thanksgiving will feel different this year. Not heavier, not lonelier, just different, like a chapter already turning before I'd even realized it." Behind me, Evelyn closed the file of signed documents, her soft smile still there. Agnes exhaled the tension in her frame, easing, and for the first time I realized she looked younger than when I'd first stepped onto her porch months ago. Maybe it was the light. Or maybe, finally, the weight had shifted off both our shoulders. Thanksgiving night wrapped my small Raleigh home in a warm amber glow. Candles lined the table, their light dancing across the glass frame at its center. Inside, the stitched pink ribbon rested on black velvet, its soft hue catching the flames like a quiet ember from another life. It no longer felt like a wound or proof of survival. It was simply a reminder that the years behind me had meaning, and the ones ahead would too. The air smelled of molasses cookies and roasted sweet potatoes. Familiar notes that reminded me of afternoons on Agnes's porch and the letters I'd unwrapped one by one. Those scents mixed with the rich warmth of turkey and the tang of cranberries, a comfort far from the hollow opulence of the Blake mansion. My house wasn't much, but it was a live soft lamplight in the corners, mismatched plates, voices weaving together instead of competing. Evelyn hummed softly as she moved around the stove, a dish towel over her shoulder, checking the turkey as though it were second nature. Agnes sat near the head of the table, her navy cardigan pulled tight, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of cider as she shared a quiet laugh with a neighbor about a new cafe downtown. Across from me, 2 co-workers traded stories while a young boy, our single mother neighbor's son, showed off the paper turkey he'd made in class. No one here cared about last names or legacies. There were no stiff portraits, no crystal toasts rehearsed for the sake of appearances. Just simple food, simple company, and a kind of ease that couldn't be bought or faked. When the last of the dishes settled onto the table, Evelyn tapped her glass gently. The chatter faded. Her hazel eyes reflecting the candlelight swept over the room.
I used to imagine what your first real Thanksgiving might look like, Dorian, she said. Not grand or perfect, just full of people who want to be here because they choose to be. Her words hung in the quiet. I let my gaze drift back to the framed ribbon glowing gently between the candles. Each stitch felt like a marker of the weight I'd carried the birthdays spent alone, the ledgers balanced in silence, the years defined by someone else's rules, and the freedom settling into me now. Around the table, voices rose again, soft laughter mixing with the clinking of silverware. I leaned back my chair, creaking, and felt something new, not triumph, not relief, but a peace that didn't need a name. Closing my eyes, I let the hum of conversation and the warmth of the room wash over me. No music, no speeches, no hollow praise, just the sound of people sharing a meal. When I opened them, I caught Agnes laughing at something Evelyn whispered, the boy grinning as he waved his paper turkey in the candlelight. I smiled, quiet, unforced, and thought for the first time in years that whatever chapters came next, this table, imperfect and mismatched as it was, finally felt like home. The last candle on the table flickered low, casting a soft glow on the framed pink ribbon, no longer torn but resting whole beneath the glass. Watching it, I realized some bridges aren't meant to be crossed again. Some are rebuilt, so we finally understand where we belong. Justice came in its quiet way, not through battles, but by building something that outlived bitterness. And in the warmth of new voices and shared bread, I learned that family can be chosen, stitched together like that ribbon stronger for the seams. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story, maybe over coffee or here in the comments below.